Have you ever stood in awe before St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, marveling at its grandeur, its immense dome stretching toward the heavens, its ornate fountains, and throngs of people from every corner of the world? It feels like standing at the spiritual center of the world. But here's the twist. The most fascinating part of the Vatican isn't above ground. It's below your feet, hidden in silence and shadow. Let's take a descent into history, into mystery, and into a world rarely seen. Just beneath the floor of St. Peter's Basilica lies a concealed network of chambers and corridors, the Vatican grottos. At first glance, it seems like just another old crypt. But once you step in, you quickly realize this isn't just a place of rest. It's a statement. Over 90 popes have been laid to rest here, forming a sacred continuum of leadership stretching back nearly 2,000 years. When a new pope celebrates Mass above, he's not alone. Symbolically, he's standing atop the remains of those who came before him, including, allegedly, St. Peter himself. That's a weight not just of tradition, but of legacy, of theology, power, and sometimes secrecy. What's striking isn't just the number of papal tombs, but how ornate and artistic they are. These are not just burial places, they're visual sermons carved in marble, mosaics, and symbolism. You can almost hear the whispers of time in these dim corridors, feel the pull of centuries' worth of prayers and rituals. The layout itself is a maze, confusing at first, until you realize it mirrors something even older, the structure of the original St. Peter's Basilica built by Emperor Constantine. That's right. The Vatican as we know it sits atop layers of itself like a divine Russian nesting doll. Before the Renaissance structure, there was Constantine's Basilica, built in the year 324 AD. And before that, well, this is where things get interesting. Constantine chose the site to honor the Apostle Peter, who was martyred in Rome and, according to early Christian belief, buried there. But as his builders began work, they discovered they weren't starting from scratch. Buried beneath the intended foundation was a vast Roman necropolis, an underground city of the dead, lined with lavish family tombs along an ancient road called the Via Cornelia. Imagine the dilemma. You want to honor your faith, but you're digging into a pagan cemetery. Rather than destroy the site, Roman engineers did something clever. They carefully filled in the necropolis with earth, preserving the structures, and built an artificial plateau above it as the new foundation. It's an act of historical respect and practical brilliance that allows modern archaeologists today to walk through that ancient street nearly 2,000 years later. In fact, if you know where to look, some of Constantine's original support pillars are still visible, holding up the massive basilica built in the 1500s. That means the Vatican we see today is physically and spiritually standing on the shoulders of both Roman ingenuity and Christian devotion. And yet, even with all its beauty and symbolism, something darker also lingers down there. Most people today see the Pope as a kind, grandfatherly figure in white robes, but the Church hasn't always worn such a friendly face. Between 756 and 1870, the Pope wasn't just a spiritual leader. He was also a political ruler over the Papal States, a swath of central Italy. These popes led armies, waged wars, and brokered power with emperors and kings. Their rule wasn't always peaceful. Sometimes it was downright brutal. Take, for example, the sack of Rome in 1527. Emperor Charles V's unpaid troops rampaged through the city and captured Pope Clement VII. The Vatican was ransacked, and to save himself, Clement had to pay an astonishing ransom, 400,000 Venetian ducats, which would be worth tens of millions today. It was in that chaos that one of the Vatican's most mysterious constructions proved its worth. The Passetto di Borgo, this nearly 1 kilometer-long fortified passageway, connects the Vatican to Castel Sant'Angelo, a fortress across the Tiber River. Built in the 13th century, it looks like an ordinary elevated corridor, but it has been a literal lifeline for popes under siege. Pope Clement VII himself escaped through it, while his elite Swiss Guard made a heroic last stand. 3 different popes used this escape route over the centuries. One even fled while his family followed behind with jewels and documents in hand, racing to preserve their power. It's a reminder that even the highest earthly throne isn't immune to danger or desperation. But this isn't just a story of escapes and secret passages. It's a story of what happens when a spiritual empire must also navigate the turbulent world of human politics. The Vatican today may seem like a pristine center of worship, but its past is written in blood as well as scripture. As we leave this part of the journey, the Vatican beneath our feet already feels more complex, less of a singular holy place, more of a multi-layered relic that speaks to ambition, belief, fear, and faith. And we're just scratching the surface. Next, we'll go even deeper, literally into the hidden vaults, forbidden records, and archaeological revelations that raise even more questions about what the Church chooses to preserve and what it prefers to forget. Now that we've explored the papal tombs and the hidden passageways of escape, we descend further into a place where time is recorded, redacted, and in some cases, completely erased. What lies beneath the Vatican isn't just stone and dust. It's knowledge, power, and perhaps guilt. The Vatican doesn't just keep secrets, it catalogues them on shelves that stretch over 85 kilometers in length. This is the Vatican Apostolic Archive, formerly known, more infamously, as the Vatican Secret Archive. A name change in 2019 tried to soften the reputation, but make no mistake, the secrets are still there. They just have a new label. Imagine thousands of years of church dealings tucked away, letters from popes to kings, personal notes from Michelangelo arguing about payments for the Sistine Chapel, legal records from the Galileo heresy trial, and the documents behind one of the greatest religious splits in history, the refusal to annul the marriage of King Henry VIII. That decision alone fractured the Catholic Church's monopoly in Europe and led to the creation of the Church of England. But here's the wild part. The official record of it all still exists, neatly catalogued, locked in a drawer under Vatican watch. And that's just what they let us know about. What else is buried there, beyond reach? Only a select few ever find out. Gaining access to the archives is like trying to get into a spiritual version of Fort Knox. First, you need a 4-year university degree, preferably in church history. Then you must request a specific document in advance. No browsing, no curiosity. You ask for one thing, and if you're approved, after a background check and an in-person interview in Italian, you get escorted in, like a guest in a vault, shown only what you're allowed to see. No flash drives, no cameras, no wandering off to see what else you might accidentally stumble upon. It's intellectual lockdown, and it begs the question, why the tight control? If the Church had nothing to hide, wouldn't it be a global library of truth? Wouldn't scholars be racing in and out with notes, lectures, documentaries? Instead, the Vatican's approach tells us something loud and clear. It values control over transparency. And where there is control, there is often something to conceal. Take, for instance, the Church's cooperation, or at the very least, its murky silence during World War II. There are rumors, supported by partial records, that suggest certain Vatican officials may have collaborated with the Nazis or looked the other way as Jewish assets were funneled into church accounts. To be clear, in 2020, Pope Francis ordered the release of millions of wartime documents. But to many scholars, that was just a drop in the ocean. Large portions remain sealed, and those investigating are met with bureaucracy, vague explanations, or flat-out denial. Now let's switch gears, but stay in the depths. In 1939, while workers were renovating parts of St. Peter's Basilica, they accidentally broke through a crumbling wall. Behind it, their flashlights revealed what hadn't been seen in over 1,600 years, the forgotten Roman necropolis, the very same one Constantine's engineers had preserved under layers of earth. Picture this, an ancient Roman street, perfectly preserved beneath one of Christianity's holiest sites. Tombs with inscriptions, mosaics, and frescoes, each revealing how Roman families mourned and memorialized their dead. These tombs date from 130 to 300 AD, a period where Rome was transitioning from paganism to Christianity. And here's what's fascinating. You can actually see the evolution of belief etched in stone. Pagan symbols begin to fade, and Christian markings, fish, crosses, Christograms, begin to appear. It's like watching religious history unfold one tomb at a time, a visual, spiritual evolution, but the real showstopper lies at the very end of this ancient street. Beneath 12 meters of Vatican marble, archaeologists discovered a modest grave, marked not by opulence, but by reverence. Built around it was a second-century monument known as the Trophy of Gaius, named after an early Christian who referenced its existence. This small site, it turns out, was believed to be the burial place of St. Peter himself, the apostle, the rock upon which Jesus declared he would build his church. For centuries, the existence of Peter's grave had been debated. Was it a legend, a metaphor? But in the 1960s, bones found at the site were examined. In 2013, after decades of theological and scientific scrutiny, Pope Francis publicly displayed the bone fragments, believed to be Peter's. They belonged to a robust man in his 60s, buried in a manner consistent with Christian veneration. DNA can't prove it was Peter, but all the evidence lines up. And if true, the implications are staggering, because that would mean the entire Vatican complex, its architecture, its theology, its global reach, literally and symbolically stands on the grave of a Galilean fisherman turned martyr. Think about that. It's more than history, it's myth made material. But here's what keeps pulling at the mind. For every secret the Vatican has revealed, how many more remain hidden? The archives are just the tip of the iceberg. Beneath the layers of marble and iconography lies a centuries-long struggle between faith and control, transparency and secrecy. We've walked Roman roads underground, stood at the alleged tomb of a saint, and brushed past the church's most damning files, and yet we're still only guests in a house of secrets. We've now walked ancient Roman roads underground, passed by the tombs of popes and saints, and glimpsed the immense archive of knowledge locked behind the Vatican's sealed doors. But the deeper we dig, the stranger and murkier it all becomes. Because for everything the Vatican reveals, there seems to be twice as much it doesn't. And when secrecy becomes tradition, conspiracy becomes inevitable. Let's be clear. Not every theory that's ever been whispered about the Vatican deserves credibility. Some are absurd, aliens, time machines, portals to other dimensions. But others come from real fragments of evidence, documents that do exist, testimonies that were never meant to surface, and decisions made in silence that changed the world. Let's start with the records from World War II. For decades, historians have begged for full access to documents from the Vatican's dealings during the Nazi regime. And while Pope Francis did open millions of pages in 2020, researchers quickly noted many key files were missing. What was shared focused on humanitarian efforts, letters from victims, and administrative summaries. But what about the correspondence between Vatican officials and Nazi leaders? What about the Church's role in helping certain war criminals flee Europe post-war? There's long been speculation that a clandestine network known as the Rat Lines helped high-ranking Nazis escape to South America, and that some of those channels began in Rome. Documents linking certain bishops to forged travel documents and protection arrangements have surfaced. The Vatican has either declined to comment or dismissed them as misinterpretations, but even silence can be an answer, can't it? And then there are the financial scandals. A church built on charity should be above monetary scandal, right? And yet, time after time, financial impropriety has stained the Vatican's reputation. Stolen donations, money laundering through the Vatican Bank, offshore accounts. There's an entire thriller-worthy saga about how funds meant for missions and orphans ended up in questionable hands. In 2021, the Vatican even put a Cardinal Angelo Becciu, on trial for embezzlement. That's historic. But the trial also revealed how opaque the Vatican's internal accounting system really is. There's no IRS for the Holy See. When something goes missing, often no one's accountable. And the archives. They hold ledgers and receipts that the public will never see. So when people whisper about secrets in the dark, maybe it's because they've seen too many truths get buried in daylight. But of course, not every secret is about politics or money. Some are far more speculative. Let's talk about the Vatican and extraterrestrials. Yes, this theory exists, and not just on the fringe. According to some theorists, the Vatican holds ancient texts and relics that document contact with beings not of this earth. Some even point to the Vatican's Lucifer telescope in Arizona. Yes, that's its real nickname, used by the Vatican Observatory. It's a legitimate scientific facility run by Jesuit astronomers. But of course, when you mix religion, advanced optics, and a slightly sinister-sounding telescope, conspiracy theorists have a field day. One popular tale claims there are sealed vaults beneath the Apostolic Archives that contain texts describing celestial visitors, or even items of divine origin that suggest advanced technology. Now, let's take a breath here. Does that sound far-fetched? Absolutely. But it tells us something important. The lack of transparency fuels the mythos. People invent answers when they're not given any. And when the world's most powerful religious institution wraps its archives in centuries of silence, the imagination begins to roam, and sometimes the truth that is revealed is just as strange as the fiction. For example, in the 1960s, after excavating the necropolis, the Vatican discovered early Christian graffiti that read, "Peter is here." Not a metaphor, but a literal message carved into the wall above the bones that may belong to St. Peter. What does it say about the Church's relationship to its own history that such discoveries took decades to surface and longer to be acknowledged? Or consider the recent revelations about abuse cover-ups, scandals not limited to one nation or decade, but stretching across continents and generations. Documents implicating officials were often destroyed, hidden, or simply ignored. The Church's approach wasn't just denial. It was systemic silence. So the next time you wonder why people are so drawn to what lies under the Vatican, it's because what's buried there, physically and metaphorically, represents something larger than stone and scripture. It represents the battle between reverence and truth. The Vatican is a paradox, a beacon of spiritual hope and a fortress of political power, heir-keeper of divine teachings and a guardian of earthly secrets. And to be fair, the Church is not a villain in a Dan Brown novel. It's a vast institution shaped by centuries of conflict, compromise, and complexity. But when you build a spiritual empire on layers of history, secrecy becomes your foundation. We've traveled through underground crypts, secret corridors, forbidden archives, and ancient tombs. We've brushed against history's most powerful spiritual figures and its most guarded secrets. But now, it's time to ask, what does all of this mean for us today? Because what's under the Vatican isn't just bones and bricks. It's belief, it's power. And it's the unspoken understanding that what lies beneath us often defines what we choose to build above. Let's return for a moment to that small grave, 12 meters under the high altar of St. Peter's Basilica, modest, unadorned, covered by centuries of marble, mystery, and myth. And yet, that one burial site, allegedly belonging to St. Peter, became the cornerstone for the most powerful religious institution in the world. Isn't that extraordinary? A fisherman from Galilee, executed by an empire, buried in a forgotten corner of Rome, and centuries later emperors, kings, and popes would raise monuments in his name. And not just monuments. Doctrines, wars, alliances, art, and theology all trace back to that man, and his unshakable belief in a message. But what's even more extraordinary is how much of this foundation, both literal and symbolic, remains hidden. Why is it that the Vatican, an institution meant to spread light, so often operates in shadow? Perhaps it's because with great spiritual authority comes great institutional fear. Fear of scandal, fear of contradiction, fear of loss. The Church has existed for nearly 2,000 years. That kind of longevity doesn't happen by accident. It requires preservation, strategy, and sometimes secrecy. But here's the problem with secrecy. It may protect the institution, but it often erodes the faith of the people. Because faith thrives in honesty, in light, in the open air of confession, reflection, and reform. And yet, beneath the Vatican are archives sealed to public scrutiny, files hidden from history, financial transactions locked behind holy doors, and a refusal, at times, to reckon with the sins of the past. Abuse scandals, political deals, cover-ups, not theoretical ideas but documented facts. And each time the Church buries those truths, it buries a little more of its credibility along with it. Still, the Church isn't monolithic. There have always been those inside it, reformers, truth-tellers, archivists, scientists, believers, who push for change, who dig up what's been buried, and who believe that truth, no matter how uncomfortable, is the purest expression of faith. That's why it matters what lies under the Vatican, not because of aliens or secret technology or buried treasure, but because history lives down there, and history, if left unexamined, has a way of repeating itself. The Vatican is built on layers: Roman streets, pagan graves, Christian symbols, martyr bones, imperial ambition, Renaissance brilliance, and modern controversy. It's beautiful and broken, sacred and flawed, human and divine, just like the people who made it, and in a way that makes it more relatable, more powerful. We all have our own underground, our buried pasts, our hidden doubts, the beliefs we've inherited and never questioned. But unlike the Vatican, we have the freedom to open our own archives, to face our foundations, and to ask, what am I standing on? What am I building on top of my own past? If the Vatican teaches us anything, it's that time doesn't erase secrets, it preserves them. The only question is, are we brave enough to face them? As we end this journey, imagine again the view from the square in front of St. Peter's, tourists milling about, snapping photos of the dome, children laughing, pilgrims praying. But now you know. 12 meters below their feet lies a street from ancient Rome, tombs filled with history, the bones of a man who changed the world, and vaults filled with truths the world may never read. You may never walk those tunnels yourself, but remember, some of the most powerful things in life are the things we choose to uncover. Thank you for coming on this journey. And next time someone asks, what's under the Vatican? You'll know the answer isn't just stone and skeletons. It's everything we're still afraid to talk about.